3rd of January, 2026, Caracas, 2 in the morning. The city holds its breath. Then the night splits, explosions. Doors kicked in, shadows moving fast, Delta operators silent, precise. In minutes, the president of the country with the largest oil reserves on Earth is in their hands. Hours later, Donald Trump steps up to a microphone. He announces the capture of Nicolás Maduro. Calm voice, high stakes. A military operation against a sovereign state in the 21st century sounds like a thriller, but the script was written long ago. This is not just a raid, this is the latest chapter in an economic war that has stretched for 100 years. Why did this country become a battlefield? Because beneath its soil lies more than 300 billion barrels of oil. That is roughly 4 times more than Russia. Oil that thickens when it cools, oil that needs special refineries, oil that can make empires greedy, oil that can break a nation. Why does America claim something was stolen? How can you steal what lies in your own land? Sounds absurd. But it only sounds that way if you look at the last scene and ignore the first act. To understand the accusation, you have to wind back the clock. Way back, early 20th century, the Rockefellers arrive. Yes, those Rockefellers. They bring drills, engineers, contracts that look clean on paper and heavy in practice. They switch on the pumps. Oil rises, money flows. Headlines celebrate modernity and progress. The map of power tilts. By the late 1930s, Venezuela is the 3rd largest oil producer in the world. Only the United States and the Soviet Union are ahead. Think about that. A small nation suddenly standing shoulder to shoulder with giants. The charts go up, the budgets swell, the elites toast success. But look closer. The paradox appears. The country gets rich, the people do not. Why? Because of what economists quietly call the resource curse. Or more bluntly, the Dutch disease. When one sector becomes a fountain of cash, everything else withers. Why plant crops if oil pays more today? Why build factories if a barrel buys more than a machine? The short-term money feels irresistible. The long-term capacity dies in the dark. Watch the numbers. From 1920 to 1935, the share of oil in exports jumps from 2% to 91%. Do you see the pattern? When 91% of your lifeblood comes from one vein, any cut can become fatal. Farms shut down, workshops close, cities swell without a backbone. A nation forgets how to feed itself because the world will sell you everything as long as you sell it oil. Mid-20th century, a new costume appears on stage. A company that looks local. Creole Petroleum, a Venezuelan name, a Venezuelan registration. But the capital behind it? American. That is not a secret. That is the design. The pipeline of control runs through ownership, not flags. Under Venezuela's heavy crude, America builds something of its own. Refineries, specialized, tuned not for light, sweet oil, but for thick, stubborn barrels pulled from Venezuelan earth. This matters. It creates dependence in both directions. Oil extracted there, value added here. The perfect chain if you sit in a boardroom in New York and read profit statements. The perfect trap if you sit in a village in Venezuela and watch prices spike while jobs vanish. So where does the word theft enter? From a mindset, from expectations hardened into entitlement. When investors pour in money, they tell themselves a story, risk deserves reward. Contracts are sacred. The flows will remain theirs. And when the political winds shift, when a sovereign state flexes its right to decide, the story flips. Fear replaces confidence. Greed turns to accusation. They stole our asset, even if the oil never crossed a border without a ship. Even if the wells stand inside another nation's soil. This is how economics becomes a weapon, not through one dramatic act, but through pressure that lasts decades, through infrastructure that locks choices, through narratives that shape what feels fair. A refinery built in Texas for heavy crude dictates what oil is useful. A local company with foreign masters dictates who gets paid first. The people on the ground, they are told to wait, to be patient. to accept that tomorrow will be better if they hold still today. But people do not hold still. Markets do not hold still. Prices swing. Leaders panic. Voters demand answers. And when the ledger does not balance, force walks in. Sanction here, threat there, a raid on a cold January night that shocks the world and feels, somehow, inevitable. Ask yourself, why does this keep happening? Why do nations with treasure under the ground so often end up trapped above it? Because fear and greed are not just emotions of traitors. They drive presidents, they drive boards, they drive the quiet men who write the contracts everyone signs without reading the fine print. The seed was planted a century ago, drills in the jungle, papers stamped in capital cities, a flow chart that routed wealth one way and risk the other, from 2% to 91%, from farms to fields of steel, from sovereignty in theory to dependency in practice. And so when a microphone lights up and a leader declares a capture, remember the prelude. Remember the rigs, the refineries, the perfect chain, oil pulled there, value captured here. Do you see it now? This is not about a single night in Caracas. It is about a century of choices, about the hunger for control, about the cost of letting one resource define a nation's fate. In the end, oil is not just fuel, it is leverage, it is pressure. It is the quiet force that turns economics into a battlefield and markets into weapons. Profits were supposed to stop leaking into American pockets. That was the dream. Nationalize it all, keep the wealth at home. Simple, clean, fair. 1976, President Carlos Pérez takes the stage. He nationalizes the oil industry. He takes everything from foreign companies and hands it to the state. A new giant is born, PDVSA. Think Gazprom. Think Rosneft, the Venezuelan version of a national oil colossus. On paper, it looks perfect. From now on, every dollar from oil should fill the Venezuelan budget, not someone else's, not an outsider's. The country's own people should benefit. Right? But watch what happens when power meets temptation. The machine runs hot, then it runs wasteful. PDVSA becomes bloated. Top managers award themselves enormous salaries, prestige projects appear, price tags explode, no clear purpose, no clear payoff. Corruption creeps in at every level, and despite high oil prices, the country's external debt rises. That's not a strategy, that's a leak. A slow, expensive, demoralizing leak. Why does this happen? Greed, complacency, the illusion that oil will forgive every mistake. Investors cheer the headlines. Politicians promise the moon. No one looks at the balance sheet until it's too late. February 18th, 1983, Black Friday for Venezuela. The bolivar breaks, the local currency collapses under the weight of foreign debts and falling oil prices. The crowd panics. Savings vanish in real time. The rich hedge. The poor absorb the hit, and trust in the system cracks. Between 1979 and 2002, the economy outside oil shrinks by almost 20%. That is the silent disaster. Factories stop modernizing. Stores make less each year. Farms cut corners, then cut output. Picture it. You own a small factory, a shop, a farm. Year after year, everything runs a little worse. Costs go up, demand goes down, access to credit dries up. You stop investing, you stop dreaming. 23 years later, everything not tied to oil has withered. Do you see the trap? A country with the largest oil reserves grows poorer year after year. The more it leans on oil, the weaker everything else becomes. One leg grows massive, the rest of the body atrophies. 1986, a pivotal decision. PDVSA buys 50% of a United States refining company called CITGO. 4 years later, in 1990, it buys the remaining 50%. Now Venezuela owns assets on American soil. Real assets, strategic assets, not just crude in the ground. Refining power, distribution reach, market access. 3 giant refineries, a web of pipelines across 23 states, 13,000 gas stations. At its peak, CITGO controls 10% of the entire American oil market. Every 10th pump in the United States runs on Venezuelan oil. Think about the leverage. Think about the cash flow. That is not a side hustle. That is a pipeline into the heart of the world's biggest consumer. And here's the beauty of it. Venezuelan crude is heavy. It needs special processing, fancy units, complex chemistry. CITGO has exactly that. The right refineries, the right hardware, the right logistics. It turns a tough barrel into a profitable product. This is synergy done right. On the surface, but there's a nuance, a risk hiding in the fine print. That same infrastructure binds Venezuela to the American market. Without access to those refineries, that heavy crude loses value. Quickly, the market narrows, margins shrink, options vanish. Dependency is a slow chain. You barely feel it going on. You feel it when you try to move. The 1990s arrive. Inside Venezuela, power concentrates. Big oligarchs carve the country into fiefdoms. Oil money feeds political elites, not schools, not hospitals. Not the people building businesses outside oil. Inequality grows, resentment hardens. The street understands the game even when the boardroom pretends not to. What happens to investor psychology in this storm? Greed at the top. Fear at the bottom. The middle freezes. People chase quick wins. They dump long-term plans. They sell at the bottom. They buy promises at the top. Panic and euphoria take turns steering the wheel. Do you see the pattern? This is how a nation with everything on paper ends up with so little in practice. Weak institutions, skewed incentives, over-reliance on a single commodity, the illusion of control when prices rise, the shock when they fall, and then, out of that frustration, someone steps forward, a man who promises to flip the table, to punish the winners, to lift the losers. To rewrite the rules, the crowd listens, the elites worry. The stage is set for a turn that will change everything. 1999. Hugo Chávez becomes president, a charismatic populist with a simple promise. Oil wealth should belong to the people, not to American corporations. It sounds righteous, it sounds fair, it taps into pride and pain. He moves fast, a sweeping wave of nationalization. American and British companies that poured billions into Venezuelan fields lose control of their assets. ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil. The Canadian firm Crystalex, pushed out, not fully compensated. Contracts turn to dust, boardrooms go silent. Do you feel the shock? That cold shiver that runs through an investor when the rules change overnight. Then the fat years begin. Oil prices climb, money floods in. By 2005, Venezuela's economy tops more than $143 billion. On paper, a triumph. Income per person becomes the highest in Latin America. The message to the crowd feels vindicated. The state takes oil dollars straight into its treasury. New hospitals, new schools, support for poor families, visible wins, quick applause. But there is a deeper problem, the kind that does not ask for attention, the kind that waits. Chávez does not diversify the economy. The country stays tied to a single source, oil, one lever, one risk, and he doubles down on what he calls Bolivarian socialism, price controls, currency controls, more nationalization, more hands on the levers, less room for markets to breathe. 2006, a stark number. 45% of Venezuelan oil goes to the United States. That is 13% of America's total oil imports. Venezuela is critical to the American energy flow, yet Chávez stands at the podium of the United Nations and calls the American president the devil. He denounces American imperialism. The crowd hears fury. Washington hears threat. Sanctions begin. First targeted officials, names on lists. Then broader. The air grows heavy. Risk rises like pressure in a sealed pipe. Investors feel it in their bones. First comes denial. The oil is still flowing. The cash is still coming. The spreadsheets still smile. Then comes doubt. What if access narrows? What if compliance costs spike? What if capital cannot get out? The fear is subtle at first, then it is not. 2013, Chávez dies. The power passes to Nicolas Maduro, less charismatic, less competent, and just then the floor moves. 2014. Oil prices fall hard. From more than $100 a barrel to $30 to $40, the oxygen of the budget thins out. 90% of government revenue depends on oil. That single lever breaks. The room tilts. How does leadership respond? With reform? With a pivot? No. With more control, the worst choice at the worst time. Supermarkets are ordered to sell goods at prices several times below their real cost. It sounds compassionate, it feels decisive, but the math is brutal. Sell at a loss and you vanish. Shelves empty in hours, scarcity blooms, food, medicine, toilet paper. Basics become trophies. Do you see the pattern? In the boom, greed whispers that nothing can go wrong. In the bust, panic screams that nothing can go right. Policy magnifies both. Nationalization breaks trust, sanctions tighten the noose. Price controls kill supply. Every move aimed at control breeds more chaos. Every attempt to soothe the crowd punishes the market that feeds it. For an investor, this is the anatomy of risk you taste, not just read about. First, the thrill of high prices, then the slow creep of political risk. Then the shock of a commodity collapse. Finally, the policy spiral that turns a downturn into a disaster. The headlines blame fate. The balance sheets tell a different story. Concentration, hubris, fragile systems leaning on one pillar. Ask yourself, when a nation relies on one product, what happens when that product betrays it? When leaders fear markets more than shortages, what fills the shelves? When the crowd cheers easy wins, who pays the bill later? The lesson is not abstract, it is visceral. Wealth without diversification is a mirage. Power without restraint is a trap. And in the end, prices are not suggestions. They are signals. Ignore them and the shelves go bare. Ignore them and the fear you tried to quiet comes roaring back. Inflation explodes. Money melts in your hands. The believer turns into confetti. Prices sprint ahead of paychecks. You wake up poorer than you went to bed. That is not a chart. That is a feeling in your stomach. Then a spark of hope. In late 2015, the opposition wins the parliamentary elections. People breathe. Maybe the tide turns. But the Supreme Court, loyal to Maduro, blocks every attempt to change the government. Hope stalls, confidence cracks, investors flinch. Why take risk when the rules can be rewritten overnight? Oil production begins to plunge. In 2014, 2,700,000 barrels a day. By 2018, 1,300,000. By January 2019, 1,100,000, more than 2 times down. Revenue collapses, budgets tear, panic creeps in. Why does production fall? Not geology, politics, no investment, no new equipment, no maintenance, no trust. Skilled workers vanish. They leave the country or they stay and earn pennies and simply stop trying. Theft at every level, mismanagement on repeat. You cannot run a complex industry on slogans and fear. Years of hard control crush the economy. It shrinks by more than 80%. Imagine your salary cut by 5 times. Imagine paying more for less every single month. Factories run at 30% of capacity. 10 machines on the floor, only 3 still alive. The other 7 cannibalized, silent, or stripped for parts. Productivity does not slip. It evaporates. Here is the critical point. There is no technical reason for this collapse. None. Venezuela has the reserves, the geology. The low costs, enough oil in the ground to pump profitably for a long time. But the system around the wells is broken. Contracts mean little. Incentives mean less. Politics crushes physics. Do you see the pattern? From 2017 to 2019, the United States shifts to total sanctions, an economic blockade. First, American companies are banned from buying Venezuelan government bonds. That is like forbidding anyone to lend the country money. Debt markets close. Then comes sanctions on gold, another artery cut, and in January 2019, the critical blow, sanctions on PDVSA. American companies can no longer buy Venezuelan oil. The largest buyer disappears overnight. Almost half of all Venezuelan oil used to go to America. Half. Imagine your biggest customer vanishing while your costs keep ticking up and your talent keeps walking out the door. How long can you survive on wishful thinking? Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez will later say, over the entire period of American sanctions, the economy's losses amounted to about $700 billion. The oil industry lost about $232 billion. Whether you agree with the number or not, feel the scale. Sanctions become carpet bombing. They hit every sector that still breathes. Supply chains wither. Contracts freeze. Partners look away. Banks step back. Venezuela can no longer sell oil to the United States. It cannot access the international banking system. Without buyers, inventory is just liquid weight. Without banking rails, a sale is just a promise. Cash flow dies, valuations die with it. That is how a currency becomes paper. That is how an industry with world-class reserves becomes a cautionary tale. As an investor, this is the trap. You see assets that look cheap, you see reserves, equipment, and history, you see past cash flows and think they will come back. You feel greed whispering, buy the dip, but this is not a normal cycle. This is regime risk, political risk, sanctions risk. It is the kind of risk that does not mean revert on your schedule. You cannot outsmart a locked door. You cannot model a court that ignores votes. When power blocks change, when capital flees, when talent leaves, prices do not signal opportunity. They signal danger. Fear is not always your enemy. Sometimes it is a map. Imagine waking up and every bank in the world has shut its doors to you. Cards declined. Wires blocked. No credit, no lifeline. Now imagine your oil is heavy, thick. To sell it, you must mix it with special light crude. But you cannot buy that light crude anymore. You are cut off. Every day without it bleeds cash. Panic creeps in. Pride says hold. Reality says sink. And that is where the battle for CITGO begins. Remember CITGO? Venezuelan assets on United States soil, worth billions. 3 refineries. Pipelines snaking across states. 13,000 gas stations, supplying 50% of the gasoline used in the United States. A massive machine, a money fountain, a shield, and a sword. Go back to 2016. PDVSA is desperate. It borrows from Rosneft. $1.5 billion. Not small money. And how do you secure a loan when no one trusts you? You pledge your crown jewel. PDVSA puts up 49.9% of CITGO as collateral, like putting your home on the line. Miss a payment, lose the house. Then it goes further. Another 5.1% of shares is pledged to back bonds, another kind of debt, another chain around the same asset. Do you see it? That adds up to 100% of CITGO encumbered. Every share promised, every path out mortgaged, in writing, in ink. Time passes, interest ticks, pressure grows. Twice a day, fear and greed shake hands. Investors smell blood. Creditors rehearse their victory speeches. The prize is clear. A clean, legal takeover if the debtor fails. Then comes 2019. The debts to Rosneft and the bondholders come due. PDVSA has no cash. Bankrupt, the vault is empty, the clock hits zero. By logic, the collateral should go to the creditors. That is why collateral exists. You borrow, you default. They take the asset. Simple. Predictable, the way the system holds together, but then something unprecedented. January of 2019. Juan Guaido, Speaker of Venezuela's parliament, declares himself interim president. The United States recognizes him instantly and then passes him the keys to CITGO. Now, on paper, CITGO no longer belongs to Maduro's government. It sits under Guaido's control. A political shift becomes a financial firewall. The game board flips, and the United States Treasury steps in, special rules, emergency protection, 3 months of legal armor around CITGO, then another extension, and another, and another. Time becomes a weapon. The creditors wait. The clock stretches, the prize is locked in a glass case. Rosneft cannot take what was pledged. Others cannot either. Not because the contracts changed, but because the interests of the United States say no. Power bends the rails, contracts meet geopolitics. And geopolitics usually wins. Meanwhile, a line forms at the door, a long line. Crystalex, a Canadian company, steps forward. It wants $1.4 billion for the nationalization of its gold mining assets back in 2011. ConocoPhillips and others file claims too. Total demands reach $20 billion. Everyone wants a slice. Everyone points at CITGO. It is the only asset within reach, the only thing left to grab. Fear turns to frenzy. Greed turns to strategy. Some wait, some sue, some lobby. The courtroom becomes the battlefield. The refinery becomes the hostage. Then, in 2021, a court in Delaware authorizes a sale of CITGO to satisfy these claims. Not speculation, not rumor. A legal path to auction the jewel, to turn steel and concrete into cash and checks. And what does that mean? It means the collateral that was supposed to protect one set of creditors now sits in the crossfire of many. It means delay is a strategy. It means patience is profit or loss. By 2022, the pressure has only intensified. Every party knows the stakes. Every move sends a signal. One misstep and decades of value vanish. Why does this happen? Because in markets, fear and greed never travel alone. Because when you are cut off from banks, you sell tomorrow to survive today. Because collateral is power until politics moves the goalposts. Do you see the pattern? Debt makes promises. Crisis breaks them. Law tries to fix it. And in the background, someone always watches, waiting for the moment you blink. The court locks in a sale timeline and brings in a specialist investment bank to run the auction. This is not routine. When a judge hires a banker, the gavel is already in the air. You can hear it. You can feel the countdown. December 2024. A judge gives a preliminary green light to an offer worth $5,900 million from Elot Investment Management, a subsidiary of a major American fund. The room goes quiet. Distressed investors smell blood. Others smell risk. Which are you? Venezuela files an appeal. Their message is simple and searing. The company CITGO is a crown jewel of PDVSA. Washington, they say, is trying to rob it through a courtroom trick that violates the law. They argue the government of Venezuela and PDVSA were intentionally, illegally shut out of the process. Do you hear the subtext? If the rules can be bent for them, they can be bent for you. That is the whisper every investor hears at night. Now the political weather turns. A storm front builds on the horizon. A familiar figure returns to the White House. 2025, the second presidential term of Donald Trump. He does not hint, he declares. In December, he writes on social media that Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. He says it will only grow. He promises a shock unlike anything they have ever felt until they return to the United States all the oil, the land, and the other assets he says were stolen. Read that again. A demand for a sovereign state to hand over natural resources on its own soil. In his logic, the nationalizations under Chávez equal theft. So the bill comes due, oil, land, assets, pay up, end of December. The United States Navy masses in the Southern Caribbean, the biggest show of force in 5 decades. Official story, anti-narcotics operations. Unofficial reality, a blockade in all but name. Do you see how markets read that? Supply risk, sanctions risk, force majeure risk. You do not need a press release to price fear. Then it escalates. The Trump administration seizes 3 oil tankers carrying Venezuelan crude in the Caribbean. The first tanker is taken on December 10. 2 million barrels aboard, headed for Cuba, redirected to a port in Texas. Headlines explode. Traders pull up charts. Bondholders check covenants. Funds with exposure to CITGO feel their stomachs drop. Is this a window to buy or a trap that snaps shut? January 3rd, 2026. A military operation in Caracas. The line between lawfare and warfare blurs into a single hard edge. If you are an investor, this is the moment your models fail. Spreads blow out, spreads widen again, liquidity vanishes. You cannot hedge a knock at the door. Step back. Why now? Why this level of aggression? The first reason is geopolitics. For the past 20 years, Venezuela has cultivated deep ties with China and Russia. That is not just diplomacy, that is leverage, that is credit. That is infrastructure, ports, and payment rails. From Washington's view, those ties turn a regional dispute into a global chessboard. From an investor's view, they turn a legal question into a geopolitical proxy fight. You are no longer modeling assets, you are modeling power. So, what do you do when courts move faster than contracts? When ships are seized and timelines compressed to days, not quarters, fear tells you to run. Greed tells you to stay. Panic tells you to sell at any price. Discipline whispers something else. Watch the process. Map the incentives. Read every motion, read every order, because in moments like this, value is born in chaos and destroyed there too. The difference is whether you confuse noise with signal. Do you see the pattern? Courtroom, cabinet room, war room. The same asset moving through all three. The auction clock is still ticking. The appeal is still pending. The fleet is still at sea. And for anyone with money on the line, every headline is a trigger. Every rumor is a trade. Every hour is a test of nerve. Venezuela carries China's largest outstanding IOU, about $10 billion. That is not just a debt line. That is a pipeline of influence. Beijing is the world's biggest buyer of oil. Caracas ships barrels east to a power Washington calls a strategic adversary. In American war rooms, that is a hard red line. Look at the ground truth. Venezuela sits on 303 billion barrels of proven reserves. Roughly 1/5 of all known oil. One country, 1/5. If those barrels align with China, the balance shifts. That is the fear. That is the pressure point. Why does this matter now? Energy security. Yes, the world is moving toward renewables, but the road is long. The pace is uneven. Wind and solar surge, then stall. Storage lags, grids strain. Meanwhile, planes fly on jet fuel, ships burn diesel. Supply chains still run on oil for years to come, maybe decades. Power is the ability to choose when to turn the tap. Control the largest reserves and you control options, prices, alliances, timelines. You shape tomorrow's energy map. That is not a theory. That is leverage. Then there is CITGO. In December 2024, a court approved its sale. On paper, just a corporate event. In reality, a lever. If CITGO goes to outside investors with no ties to Washington, that lever weakens. Access, oversight, influence, all diluted. The boardroom door closes unless the sale coincides with regime change. Overthrow the Maduro government at the same time and a different outcome appears. A friendly cabinet, a reset of contracts, a review of past deals. Renegotiations. Do you see the strategy? Timing is power. Legal documents are not the endpoint. They are the battlefield. And hanging over all of this is a very old sentence. The Monroe Doctrine, 1823, the Western Hemisphere as an American sphere of interest. North America, South America. The backyard metaphor is crude, but that is how the policy has been used. Fast forward to today, Russia knocks, China courts. New ports, new loans, new promises. Washington hears an echo. The doctrine is not a museum piece. It is a reflex. Now, step back. This is not the first time oil and power met at the same crossroads. Iraq, 2003. Saddam Hussein had nationalized the oil industry. He pushed away dollar pricing. Washington marched in under the banner of weapons of mass destruction. None were found. The statue fell. The regime collapsed, and Iraqi oil flowed back to the global market under frameworks where Western companies held sway. Markets reopened. Spigots turned. Flags were raised. Do you see the pattern? Libya, 2011. Muammar Gaddafi controlled serious reserves. He spoke of a gold dinar for African oil trade, a direct challenge to dollar dominance. NATO intervened in the civil war. Gaddafi was killed. The state fractured, chaos spread, yet the oil did not disappear. It re-entered channels reachable by Western firms. The map changed. The barrels moved. The currency question went quiet. Iran, 1953. The reference alone pulls a thread. Oil, sovereignty, intervention. You know how that story is usually told, so circle back to Venezuela, debt to China, oil to China, reserves that dwarf most nations. A strategic doctrine from the 19th century pressing on a 21st century chessboard, a corporate asset in CITGO that can tilt leverage one way or the other, and a leadership in Caracas that stands at the center of it all. Fear drives timelines, greed sharpens offers, panic pushes buttons. The market watches the ticker. Diplomats count votes. Generals brief maps. Lawyers draft clauses. It is one struggle with many fronts. Ask yourself, who gets to choose where those barrels go? Who sets the price? Who writes the contracts? In the end, control over reserves is control over narratives. And narratives move money, armies, and elections. Do you see the pattern? A prime minister stands up and says, enough. Mohammad Mossadegh nationalizes the Anglo-Iranian oil company. One decision. One lever pulled. Oil, the lifeblood, back in national hands. Then the pushback. The Central Intelligence Agency and British intelligence move in. A coup. Streets in turmoil. The Shah returns to the throne. Order restored, at least for those who wanted their old order back. And soon, foreign companies regain access to Iranian oil. The circle completes itself. Do you see the pattern? Nationalize, sanction, pressure. Push for regime change, restore control. It is not random, it is choreography. When a nation touches the oil valve, the world responds. Now look at Venezuela. The same playbook with local twists, geography first. Venezuela sits close to the United States, not a distant theater. A backyard, proximity magnifies power. Media attention, political pressure, faster, sharper, louder. Second, the economic lever, CITGO. A Venezuelan asset on American soil, a refinery network, a cash flow machine, an asset, and a hostage at the same time. Leverage that can be frozen, redirected, or broken apart. When your crown jewel sits in someone else's jurisdiction, every negotiation starts with a disadvantage. Third, ideology. Under Chávez and Maduro, Venezuela presents itself as a socialist state, openly opposed to American capitalism, flags, slogans, speeches. That ideological clash hardens positions, it turns policy into identity. Compromise becomes betrayal. The market hates that. Why? Because ideology rarely prices risk rationally. Fourth, the humanitarian crisis. Empty shelves, power cuts, hospitals without supplies. People waiting in lines that do not move. Pain becomes a headline. Headlines become justification. Interventions look cleaner when wrapped in moral language. This is how pressure gains a halo. Now the numbers that land like a punch. Venezuela now pumps around 1 million barrels of oil a day. In 2024, oil exports brought in roughly $17.5 billion. Sounds big until you compare. Before the crisis in 2013, production stood near 2,700,000 barrels a day. Annual oil sales were more than $90 billion. That is not a dip, that is a cliff. Colossal losses, revenue streams shattered. Cash that once kept the lights on simply gone. The country has about 30 million people. Most live below the poverty line. Think about that. The nation with the largest oil reserves on the planet, and most of its people cannot afford essentials. The average income per person per year is around $4,569, about $380 a month. Less than in Moldova, less than in Ukraine. The paradox is brutal. Oil wealth in the ground, poverty above it. Hyperinflation finished what sanctions and mismanagement started. savings erased, the bolivar fell in value millions of times. Imagine this. You have 100,000 rubles in your account. You feel secure. A few years pass. You cannot buy a loaf of bread with it. That is not volatility. That is financial annihilation. And when money dies, trust dies with it. Pricing breaks. Contracts stop meaning anything. Markets turn into rumors, so people leave. More than 7 million Venezuelans have fled in recent years, nearly 1 in 4. Families split across borders, children growing up in countries their parents never planned to see. This is the largest migration crisis in modern Latin American history, not a statistic, a wound that keeps bleeding talent, energy, hope. Meanwhile, the external debt is estimated at around 200% of the entire economy. Think about carrying twice your body weight every step you take. That is what servicing that burden feels like. Every dollar that goes to creditors is a dollar that does not fix a road, buy medicine, or stabilize a currency. For an investor, what does this brew of politics and pain mean? Fear shows up first. Sanctions risk, contract risk, seizure risk. You look at a balance sheet and know it can be wiped with one signature. Greed arrives next. Assets look cheap, oil in the ground does not vanish. Price charts whisper about turnarounds and rebounds, then panic lurks. A headline hits, a pipeline stops, a court freezes, CITGO cash flows. And your model dissolves into noise. Why does this happen? Because the pattern is older than any single country. Touch oil, activate pressure. Force choices, then watch who holds the levers. Geography, strategic assets, ideology, humanitarian framing. Each one is a pressure point. Together, they can crack a state. So trace the sequence with clear eyes: nationalization, sanctions, attempts at regime change. Restoration of foreign access. The names and flags shift, the logic does not. In Iran, it led back to foreign companies at the wellhead. In Venezuela, the script rhymes with a twist of distance, of CITGO leverage, of ideology, of crisis as moral cover. If you are trying to understand risk, do not start with price, start with power. Who can turn the valve? Who can choke the cash flows? Who can claim the asset in court? Once you answer that, the numbers begin to make sense. And the story of oil stops being a mystery and becomes what it has always been. A contest of control, fear, and the cost of defying the order built around it. Even if Venezuela devoted everything it produced for 2 full years, it still could not repay its debts. Think about that. 2 years of sweat. 2 years of oil, 2 years of labor, and the ledger would still bleed red. PDVSA holds assets abroad worth billions. On paper, that sounds powerful. In reality, those assets sit frozen, seized, or pledged to creditors. Locked away, untouchable. A trophy case behind glass. This is not just accounting, it is a trap. For policymakers, for companies, for investors who thought oil alone could outrun gravity. Why does this happen? Because the story is bigger than barrels and balance sheets. There are 3 hard lessons here. First lesson, the resource curse is real. Venezuela is the textbook case. Vast natural wealth, endless oil, and yet prosperity never arrived. Why? Because when an economy leans on one resource, it becomes a hostage. Hostage to global prices, hostage to every shock and every rumor. When oil prices fall, the floor disappears, revenues collapse, budgets implode, panic spreads. During the boom, greed whispers, spend more, borrow more, promise more. It feels safe because the money flows like a river. Politicians throw cash at problems, bureaucrats build empires. People believe the party will never end. Then prices drop. Fear takes over, cuts begin, shortages grow. The same river turns into a dry bed overnight. Do you see the pattern? One resource means 1 point of failure. And when a small circle controls the money, corruption mushrooms, inequality widens, public trust erodes. If you are an investor, you see the signals: opaque deals, shifting rules, headlines that smell of smoke. Your instinct says wait, but greed says go. That tension, that is the curse working through you. Second lesson, nationalization without competent management leads nowhere. The idea sounds fair. Oil income should benefit the people, not foreign corporations. Many nod. It feels just, but taking assets is not the same as running them. Ownership is a word, management is a discipline. After nationalization, PDVSA did not become a champion. It became a bloated, corrupt machine. Costs ballooned, production fell, politics invaded the boardroom. The mission drifted from efficiency to loyalty, and the country missed its window. Oil dollars should have built new pillars, factories, diversified industries, solid schools, modern infrastructure. That investment never came. The economy stayed narrow, fragile, overexposed to one price chart. This is a brutal lesson for any investor. A good asset in bad hands becomes a bad asset. Strategy matters, governance matters, competence beats slogans. You cannot outrun weak management with strong resources. The rock in the ground is not the same as cash in the bank. Third lesson, economic sanctions are a weapon of mass destruction. Venezuela's crisis is not only self-inflicted. American sanctions targeted the economy with precision. The country was cut off from global markets, banking channels were blocked. Assets abroad were taken, deals died in inboxes, counterparties walked away, compliance fear did the rest. The result? $700 billion in losses, a humanitarian disaster, millions of refugees. Sanctions do not punish a regime the way people imagine. They punish the public. The rich and connected find paths around barriers. They eat, they medicate, they move money. Ordinary families do not. They wait in lines, they skip meals, they watch a future shrink to a question mark. For investors, this is a sobering filter. Sanctions risk is not a headline risk, it is existential. Your contracts can be perfect, your models can be flawless. If the banking pipe gets cut, nothing moves. Your asset becomes a stranded island. You cannot sell, you cannot ship, you cannot hedge. You can only watch time burn, so what do we learn when the noise is stripped away? 1. Do not bet your fate on a single commodity. 2. Resource ownership without skill is a mirage. 3. Sanctions can vaporize value faster than any market crash. Behind every chart are human emotions. Booms breed overconfidence, busts breed denial, then panic. The smart investor respects that cycle. Diversifies early, demands real governance, prices political risk as a core variable, not a footnote. Venezuela is not just a country on a map. It is a warning written in oil, a reminder that wealth without wisdom becomes a burden, that power without competence collapses on itself, and that in the end, markets do not care about slogans. They care about trust, productivity, and the freedom to trade. See the pattern. Learn the lesson, and never confuse a resource for a strategy. As I record this, we do not know how the Trump operation ends. We do not know what will happen to Venezuela. We do not know who will hold power tomorrow. But one thing is clear. This is not a story of democracy against dictatorship, not a clean fight of good against evil. It is a story of control over resources. 303 billion barrels of oil, the largest reserves on Earth. Say that number out loud. Feel its weight. In an age where energy control redraws maps and rewrites alliances, that number is not just data, it is leverage. In a region where the interests of the United States, China, and Russia collide, Venezuela is not just a country, it is a prize on the table. A prize everyone reaches for slowly, carefully, relentlessly. Why does this matter to you? Because when great powers wrestle for resources, ordinary people pay the bill. Always. We saw it across the 20th and the 21st centuries. Sanctions and embargoes, currency spirals and empty shelves, promises made in speeches, real consequences delivered in silence. The cost rarely lands on the negotiators. It lands on families, on jobs, on savings, on lives that had nothing to do with the deal. If you are an investor, you feel this in your gut. The screen flashes a headline. Your heart jumps. Fear shouts first. Sell everything. Get safe. Then greed whispers, maybe this is the moment. Maybe oil rips higher, maybe you can catch it. Back and forth, the emotions swing. Panic, relief. Then panic again. Do you see the pattern? Markets pretend to be rational. In moments like this, they are a mirror held up to human nature. But the deeper lesson is colder. Any country rich in resources yet weak in economic and military strength risks repeating this story. A different flag, the same script. Sovereignty over natural wealth lasts only as long as you can defend it. That is the rule no one likes to say out loud, but everyone plays by it. In our time, the economy is a weapon. Sanctions are a siege. Pressure is applied not with tanks, but with spreadsheets, with shipping insurance, with access to banking rails. With yes or no on a wire transfer that can feed a city or starve it. Harsh? Yes. Effective? Often. Fair? That is not the question the players ask. Power does not ask permission, it tests limits. Geography cuts both ways. Being close to a superpower sounds like an advantage. It can be a curse. If you live next to the strong, you have two choices: be a friend or be strong enough to resist. Everything else is a slow negotiation with gravity. And gravity always wins, so what do? Watching from a distance? You study the incentives, you ignore the noise and track the flows. You ask who controls the tap, who can turn it off, who can turn it back on. You watch how fear moves a crowd, how greed pulls it back. You learn to separate moral narratives from material facts, not because morals do not matter, they do, but markets move on power, on access, on control. This story is not finished. The final chapter is unwritten. The way it ends will set the rules for resource nations for many decades to come. Contracts will be priced with this memory. Elections will be fought under this shadow. Balance sheets will carry this risk like a watermark you can only see under stress. Stay alert. Watch what is done, not what is said. When the stakes are measured in billions of barrels, words are cheap, actions are costly. And in the end, the bill always finds its way to someone who did not choose the game.